Welcome to another edition of Trail Runner Nation. My name is Don Freeman.
And I'm Scott Warr. And are you wondering whether you should be carb loading or whether you should be only eating protein and fats and fueling yourself with just proteins or fats? As I was thinking about this the other day, in our running careers, Don's been running much longer than I have, but we've gone from ingesting so many grams of carbs per hour that there was this magical grams of carbs per hour we should be dosing ourselves. And whether that was with a gel or with whatever, we're supposed to be doing carb loading. In fact, there were pre-race carb loading things. And then we get into this ketogenesis type era where we were not supposed to eat any carbs and we were supposed to fuel ourselves with fats and with proteins. And there were runners out there that were running 100-mile races without any carbs whatsoever. And then we flip back. The yo-yo's going up and down, and the yo-yo comes back up, and we see what David Roche did last year at Leadville, where he crushed a many-year-old record, and his magical juice, if you will, or magical formula was super carb loading, or not carb loading, but super carb rich energy every hour. I think he was taking in like 200 grams of carbs per hour. Well, we're going to dive into that. There's some recent research that we're going to find out about today, but joining us to help us understand this is a board certified specialist in sports dietetics and the founder of Energy Performance, Bob Seebahar. He's been on our podcast multiple times. He's served as the director of sports nutrition at the University of Florida and as a sports dietitian for the U.S. Olympic Committee, including traveling to the 2008 Summer Olympics as the personal sports dietitian and exercise physiologist for the Olympic triathlon team. He has a lot of certifications, including certified strength and conditioning specialist. He's the creator of the metabolic efficiency training and nutrition I can't even say that word. Nutrition periodization concepts. He's written a book. You need to get the book. We'll link it in the show notes. He's also an accomplished athlete. He's run Boston Marathon. He's run multiple Ironman races. He's run the Leadville 100-mile race. Bob, help us out here.
Oh my gosh. Well, first, thanks guys for having me on again. It's been far too long, and I am so pumped to talk to you guys today because this is kind of how my days go, right? I kind of get wind of new research. I read some stuff, but I try to take that like research, which is pretty high level for a lot of us, and put it into real life for us athletes, right? So as an athlete myself, I'm like, just give me the talking points. Like, what do I need to know? But to your point, like, you know, I started my first true running race was a 5K. And I'm actually going to tell you the first year I did that, because I grew up as a competitive soccer player, didn't know anything about endurance. 1993, I ran my first 5K. And that was the start of I'm going to call it my very tumultuous relationship with carbohydrates, because as you referred to, back in the days, it was all about carb loading, shove as many carbs in your body as possible. When I went from 5K up to half marathon, triathlon, you name it, I started to develop a lot of GI distress. And, you know, kind of par for course, people are like, yeah, it's just part of the thing, whatever. I didn't really agree with that, which kind of led me to create the whole metabolic efficiency training concept. But listen, here's the thing where we're at now. To your example of the yo-yo, we're back. We're just like the yo-yo's moving very fast again, because this new research study literally came out January of this year, 2025. And let me just read the title, because I think it'll pique everyone's interest. Here's the title. Carbohydrate ingestion eliminates hypoglycemia and improves endurance exercise performance in triathletes adapted to very low and high carbohydrate isocaloric diets. Wow, that's a lot going on, isn't it?
I need a whiteboard, Bob. I need you to draw this out for me.
Yeah. So to kind of put this into play, what they were trying to test was three things. One, if following a low carb diet. And when I say low carb diet, they did it right. It was under 50 grams of carbohydrate per day. That is a low carbohydrate diet, right? They wanted to test the theory, which everyone's heard of, right? Oh, if you follow low carb diet, your performance will not be fantastic because you're not going to have as much gas in your gas tank, i.e. muscle glycogen, right? So they were testing this against a very high carb diet. So the high carb diet, these athletes were consuming 380 grams of carbohydrate per day. That's, just to let you know, kind of in sport dietitian language, that's pretty normal for most endurance athletes. They're probably around the 300 to 600 grams a day. So really testing the high and the low, and really putting to kind of the test, like, let's just once and for all, although it won't be because research is never once and for all, answer the question, does following a low carb diet impair performance? So that's number one. The second thing, which is super cool because I've been saying this for 20 years, is they actually they did 2 time trials. We'll get into this. And they did 2 time trials, and they fed a significantly low amount of carbohydrates during the first time trial. So you know how like the newest research with the yo-yo is, oh, we should consume 60 to 120 grams of carbs an hour, right? And you were talking about David Roche, and we've got these outliers everywhere, but that's like the traditional, that's what a lot of our runners are doing these days. But what these guys did in the research study is they fed 10 grams of carbs per hour, and they wanted to see if there was any difference in performance between the low carb and the high carb group. So those were the other thing they were looking at was because they did 6-week diet interventions. They wanted to see if 6 weeks was long enough on a low carb diet to give these metabolic adaptations. So we'll answer that a lot later, but kind of cool. So we're talking about comparing low carb to high carb diets, and then the low carb feeding, which is, probably six to 10 times less than what is actually being recommended right now. There's some super cool things we want to talk about today.
Okay, so just to clarify, and then Don has a question here, but I just want to clarify. You have these 2 groups. The group that is high or regular carb ingesting athletes in their normal training, and you have the low carb athletes in the training. So they're consuming less than 50 grams of carbohydrates per day. So you have these 2 groups: high carb normal diet, low carb normal diet. You put them in the same endurance situation, and you feed them 10 grams of carbs per hour.
Correct.
And what's the result, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Exactly.
We're gonna that's a kind of a tease, kind of a cliffhanger to have people stay with the program till we get that answer.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, I have the first question, and the one thing about this question, Bob, is I don't want an answer. So it should be a pretty good one for you. But I would think that through the education, through this episode, we won't need to answer it for people. I think it'll probably just come in. So that's kind of the goal. Here it is. I turn back the clock, and I'm thinking 2003, and it was American River 50. It was pre-race pasta feed. And, we all got in line and got in front of the pasta plates and scooped and filled, and we wanted to do well. So we took an extra scoop of the pasta, and then we made it to the cookie table, and we took 1 or maybe 3 because, hey, these are carbs and we're running a long way tomorrow.
Yeah.
And this is, 6 o'clock and we're running tomorrow at 6 o'clock or 7. This stuff's still digesting. I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but let's talk through this episode, and maybe the answer will just kind of filter through, and you can answer it anywhere you want through there. Just drop knowledge on us, Bob.
I kind of feel like we will answer that. My question that popped in my head, because I'm reliving my past too, like in 1993 with that too. And especially when I got into Ironman in 1998 or 99, I'm like, oh my God, same exact thing. Like you would do races for the pasta feeding.
Right.
Like literally, right? Because you're like, wow, that's like 3 meals I'm going to have for free, or not for free, but you know what I'm saying? But no, I would ask you, like, and I would ask the listeners too, like, do you have GI distress after you do that? Like, don't answer that question, but you know, there's associations, but this is a super cool place where I want to start with this. There, and I didn't know this, which was even better for me in reading this article, was that there seems to be a little bit of it's not a competition, but I kind of feel like it is in research. I think like if researchers were to compete, they would do this. There was actually research done in the 1930s in Scandinavia. 1930s. I looked this up. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't understand these articles because it's all Scandinavian, but that actually was testing this theory. Is it's when you feed carbohydrates during training or racing, are they helping to preserve blood sugar, or are they helping to preserve muscle glycogen? So let's just reel back a little bit, right? We store carbohydrates in our liver, in our muscles, and just a little bit in our blood, right? We store a lot more in our muscles because we have more muscle mass, a lot less in our liver, and a teeny amount in our blood sugar. So these Scandinavian researchers in the 30s were like, maybe it's what they termed exercise-induced hypoglycemia. So basically low blood sugar while you're training, right? So that was their theory. And then their theory, they actually never got to prove or disprove it, because then you come in, I think it was the 60s, 1960s, 70s, then everyone was jumping on board of the muscle glycogen. So a lot of carbohydrate research was like muscle glycogen, muscle glycogen, muscle glycogen. And then the 1980s, we had like Gatorade Sports Science Institute popping up. Everything was carb, 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 right? That was probably where the yo-yo really started. And so much of the research was on oh no, of course, we must be eating or consuming carbohydrates during exercise and training, so our muscle glycogen stays at a certain level so we don't run out of gas. But this is where this new research comes into play, is they're coming back and they're challenging that. So do your gels, do your sport drinks, your bars, whatever, are these actually helping to maintain blood sugar, which is helping performance? Or are they maintaining blood or muscle glycogen to help performance? So this is actually a very profound thought if you think about it, and one that I never thought about. And I'll just kind of go back. When I developed the metabolic efficiency training concept, of which you referenced earlier, I have proven that athletes can actually consume a lot less carbohydrate per hour once they are fat adapted, right? So interestingly enough, I have been promoting that fat adapted athletes can consume between 10 and 40 grams of carbohydrate per hour, whereas our research with carbohydrate, feedings are 60 to 120 grams. What gives? That's the yo-yo, right? So what side of the fence are we on here? Well, it kind of goes to show that it depends on what you eat during the day. And that is, again, kind of what I'm so happy about this, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been preaching this for 20 years. And finally there's research to support what I've been saying for literally 20 years. But anyway, this is where it starts. So maybe the pasta feeding is good for one group, but not the other. Or maybe it's not right for either. Let's not answer that question yet, shall we?
I like the strategy. Let's keep them interested. That's something we've never done.
Oh, what are you talking about? You guys are always interesting.
Hey, Bob, I'm curious. With some of the research out there, I'm just curious. Was this group of high carb eaters, low carb eaters, were they all men? Or were there some females involved in there? Because we know there's been very little medical research done for women. It's all been with men. Very, very biased.
Very biased. Yeah. And unfortunately, like I kind of see this. I see what's going on. I am not a researcher, obviously, but obviously I can dabble in this. I see, one of my first places my eyes went when I was reading this research study was who were the authors, right? This paper actually has some very prominent low carbohydrate diet authors. My thought, without knowing it 100%, is this is a pilot study which researchers do all the time. They pilot something, they kind of defend their null hypothesis, right? And if it goes one way, it actually supports more studies. I kind of feel that that's what they were doing here, because as they obviously identify, which most research papers do, one of their big kind of not bias, but one of their big points where we have to really take into consideration is the sample size was only 10 males, right? Ages 18 to 49. So of course we have to take that with a grain of salt. We have to put that into that little bubble. Yes, we cannot extrapolate this into our females right now. We can't even extrapolate into older individuals. And I will say that because I do metabolic efficiency testing on all sorts of individuals, male, female, younger, older. And I can tell you, everybody is N of one at the end of the day. So it's very difficult to extrapolate this. But I still feel, based on my real life knowledge and now looking at what the researchers are doing, that your daily diet, your daily nutrition plan will actually set up what you should eat in terms of the quantity of carbohydrate during training and during racing. I've been saying that for a while now too. I think this just kind of accentuates that. So unfortunately, it's a lot easier to grab a gel or 5 during training than it is changing your whole daily nutrition plan, right? So that's kind of up to the listeners, like, well, what do I want to get more bang for my buck for, right? I would also throw in the longevity piece, the health piece, which we've talked about, for hours in the past, where maybe, perhaps maybe this pasta feeding or like a daily high carb diet, maybe it's not the best thing for everybody for many different reasons.
So one of the things I thought about as you're describing that is do nothing new on race day. If you're someone that eats a lot of carbs, then maybe that's what you should do when you're running. If you don't do any carbs at all, then probably feeding yourself with a lot of carbs is sabotaging yourself. So it sounds like it all depends. The perfect answer, it depends.
I love that answer. That's actually one of my favorite answers. It depends.
That's why I brought it up.
I know. And and you guys can attest this too. We are all built differently, genetics and everything else. And, listen, I can make, and I've done this before, I can make my body very fat adapted and need very few carbohydrates during training and racing. I can also make it very carbohydrate adapted and need a lot more carbohydrates, right? But with me personally, I get a lot more GI distress when I eat more simple sugars and more calories during. So, but that's N of one. That's me. Although, did you know 30 to 90% of endurance athletes report GI distress at some time in their athletic career?
Have you seen an aid station table, Bob?
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen 100 yards past the aid station
Exactly.
in the grass?
Exactly. Yeah. That's what you, yeah.
Bob, here's a question I have for you. There's also I don't even know if this is research based, but it's some things that I've heard that if you're trying to improve your metabolic efficiency, you should not eat the same way all the time. So maybe for a period of 3 weeks, you do very low carb, and then you slowly build up after that 3 weeks and increase the number of carbs and until you get to a plateau and then drop it again. So you're taking the body's need for homeostasis and you're kind of training the body. What do you think of that?
Well, you're throwing in some really cool terms here, Scott. I like where you're going with this, man. Seriously.
I had to look that one up. Homeostasis. Okay.
Well, it all comes back to, one of the things you said earlier, nutrition periodization, right? So we know we should periodize our well, let me say that again. We should know that we should periodize our nutrition based on our training, right? So our training ebbs and flows, highs and lows, intensity and volume. We should accordingly change. We should change our nutrition based on that, right? However, we don't always do that because we get stuck in a rut. We're always doing the same thing, whatever. But that's nutrition periodization. So the easy answer is yes. The cool thing about this research study again is that's another question they were asking is 6 weeks enough to have these
Oh.
metabolic changes of having low carb. And what we know from the research already is like about 3 to 4 weeks, you'll start to see some changes. They kind of accentuated that with going another 2 weeks. What I tell athletes is like, if you do want to get adapted, whether it's fat or carbohydrate, give yourself at least 4 to 6 weeks to do that. Here's another thing to your point. And actually one thing that I'm doing right now, because I'm training for an ultra at the end of May, and right at the end of April, I will be going into a significant fat adaptation mode for that very purpose, right? So yes, to your question, we should be ebbing and flowing our carbohydrate, our protein, our fat daily nutrition to support whatever goals we have for whatever races we're doing, in addition to health and longevity reasons.
I like that. You know, you peak for races, but you can also peak your nutrition for a race.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
So what is the reason that you are doing that? In April, you're going to go very low carb. Why?
Yep. And I'm kind of setting myself up. So I'm not that I'm like carbohydrate binging right now, but I'm like enjoying my carbohydrates a little bit more because I know it's coming. But no, I mean, the whole reason is, I mean, this is a longer race, you know, it's a 145-mile race. And one of the reasons, number one, is GI distress, right? Again, for some reason, I've been plagued with the GI distress monster. So I know that if I consume, number one, a high carb diet and consume a lot of carbohydrates during training, that GI distress monster will creep up on me. And that's the last thing you want, as we all know, right? The second reason is so I don't have to carry as much, right? The more metabolically efficient you are and fat adapted, you need fewer calories. And as I kind of get into the whole time trial thing with this research study and them feeding very low carbs during, I think we're going to see this evolve a little bit into a story.
So you're training for a 145-mile run that's coming up. So your nutrition plan is to prepare you for that. Now I've got to think that if you're going to do a 5K, your diet might look a little bit different. So we have to think not only would we train different for a 5K and 100-mile, but we'd eat different too, or train our body different.
100%. And I would even probably extend that to like a half marathon maybe. And of course, it depends on your goals. Like, let's put it that way. But like when you say 5K or 10K, I think speed, right? I'm thinking fast. I'm thinking more anaerobic, which lends us to more carbohydrate-based diet because that is the energy we will use predominantly for that higher intensity effort. Once you get to half marathon, especially like marathon and beyond, 50K, 100-mile and beyond, that's where we do need that dietary shift. So that's a great point that you brought up.
Let's talk. It sounds like we're dancing around that wall that they talk about in the marathon. There's that magic wall. What is it? At 18 miles, you run through the wall.
Yep.
What is that real? That wall? Kind of tie it into this carbohydrate consumption.
It's a good question because that's about the time. It's between usually the 2 to 3 hour mark for most people where we see some significant fatigue. And is it muscle glycogen? Probably, but I'm gonna challenge that in a second. I say probably because we have enough gas in our gas tank, so enough carbohydrates stored in our muscles to give us about 2 to 3 hours of moderate intense exercise, right? So we can fuel. I can go out for a 2 to 3 hour run right now, as long as I'm fueled and not fasted. And I technically shouldn't need to eat anything because I have enough carbs stored in my muscles, right? Unless I'm following a low carb diet, although that might not be true because that's what the researchers tell us about. Anyway, but no, to your point, yeah, that's that infamous wall. That's that bonk. But I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to challenge it because I'm going to discuss some things that they talked about in this research study.
Good.
You know, I want to throw one thing that just popped in my mind as you were talking about that. Let's say that I'm going way back when we used to have Sunny Blende on the podcast, and she would talk about reloading your glycogen in your muscles after exercise, to ingest some carbs and some protein right after exercise to maximize those stores in your muscle, those glycogen stores. Can you do that and still be on a low carb So let's say I finished my run. I'm actually on a low carb diet in my normal life. Let's say that I'm doing that, and I finished a 2-hour workout today, and I gave myself, so many grams of carbohydrates. So I'm filling that tank. Can that tank stay full without any additional carb ingestion?
It's like you knew where I was going with this, Scott. This is amazing.
Oh.
I mean, the easy answer is no. Like if you don't have a lot of it being put in, you're not going to be storing a lot of it, right? And that's actually one of the big things these researchers were questioning is like, hey, if you're not getting a lot of carbs in, shouldn't that affect performance, right? I mean, obviously we would think, hey, if you're on low carb and you're going to go do a time trial, obviously you're not going to do that well because you don't have as much gas in your gas tank, right? But they actually didn't see that, which is a head scratcher, isn't it? Because now I feel like we need another yo-yo on the other hand, and I don't even know what that's for, because this is like blowing all this out of proportion, out of the water now, right? So if I may, can I talk about what they did here?
Of course.
Okay, so
absolutely,
because this is crazy. This even kind of blew my mind a little bit, because traditionally, if an athlete says, hey, I have a longer session that might have some intensity, right? That's what gets me. I'm like, okay, we need to feed more carbs because we need the performance there. Kind of like Don, you were talking about the 5K. But now, so what they did, like I said earlier, they took 6 weeks and they randomized this, and both groups got to do both. So low carb, high fat, or high carb, low fat for 6 weeks. So they did two time trials actually at both instances. So the time trials were run to exhaustion on a treadmill. So that's one thing we need to think about or remember. The second thing was it was at 70% VO2 max. So they actually did a VO2 max beforehand, so they knew, so they can do that. Now, I have a little bit of a beef with 70%. I don't believe it's high enough to, I think that should be like in the 80s at least, but we'll get into that later if we want to. Anyway, here's what happened. At the end of these 6 weeks, both groups did this initial time trial to exhaustion on the treadmill. Okay. So actually, let me give you the protocol for this first. They did the time trial, and that's when they were fed during the first time trial. They were fed 10 grams of carbs per hour. Okay. So it actually was like 3.3 grams every 15 minutes, whatever. It added up to 10 grams an hour. Right. Then they stopped and they allowed them to rest for 20 minutes. And they fed them 50 grams of carbs during that rest period. Then they got back on the treadmill and said, go run as long as you can at that 70% and let's see what happens, right? Because they were testing the whole, is it muscle glycogen or is it this low blood sugar during exercise? Like, what are these carbs helping with, right? So I'll just tell you this, there's no way you can affect your muscle glycogen in that short amount of time. You need at least 12 to 24 hours to fill up your tank again. Okay. So they were really testing the low blood sugar. This is where it gets so cool. So these groups ran on the treadmill, the first time trial, and they were fed 10 grams of carbs, which was maltodextrin. So nothing crazy, which is like a traditional thing, right? And rested for 20 minutes, ate 50 grams, got back on. Check this out. And I'm going to refer to the study because I want to get the numbers right. The low carb, high fat group. Now, the researchers reported no statistical differences between the groups. Remember that, because we would not expect that. We would expect the low carb, high fat group to have a worse performance than the high carb group, right? I mean, that's just standard, like, duh, of course. Now, because I bring up the whole no statistical difference, because they have to do that. That's what researchers do. They depend on their stats. As a real life sport dietitian and athlete, I want to know, was there actually a time difference, right? I don't care about stats. I care about time. Check this out. The low carb group on the first time trial, they went 108 minutes. Okay. Low carb, 108 minutes for the first time trial. High carb group went, would you like to postulate a guess?
Higher. I want to say higher.
And I'm gonna, just to be opposite, I'm going to say lower, Scott.
Okay, so the high carb group only went 100 minutes. So the low carb group actually ran on the treadmill 8 minutes longer than the high carb group, fed the same exact way during 10 grams of carbohydrate per hour. Mind blower. Okay. But get this. So remember, then I said they took a break for 20 minutes and they consumed 50 grams, got back on the treadmill, low carb group. The second time trial, 20 minutes later, they did 20 minutes until exhaustion. What did the high carb group do?
Gotta say it's lower.
14 minutes.
Oh.
What?
So blood glycogen plays a bigger role.
I mean, that's what they're postulating.
Blood sugar.
Yeah. So could it be that, so the first postulation is there's no difference between the type of diet you have going into before a time trial. The second postulation is, maybe the feeding of carbohydrates don't have to be at these super high levels, because maybe we're actually talking about blood sugar effects versus muscle glycogen effects. Now, I've got arguments on all sides of this, of course, because this is one research study, so on and so forth. But we have to, you can't argue with this. Even if it's a pilot study, you cannot argue with how exciting this could be for some individuals, including myself as a sport dietitian, because this opens up the way of maybe doing some even different nutrition strategies before races, right? Just like we were talking about earlier.
Let's talk about during a race. What if we're in a race, a long race, whatever, multi-hour race.
Yeah.
And there's some big climbs coming up. Some mid-race, some big peaks. Should we eat differently to prepare for the big peaks or recover after?
Traditionally, yes, right? And this is where I can argue both sides. So traditionally, I would say absolutely. If you know the course, you have to prepare for that climb, 30, 60 minutes beforehand, start consuming some carbohydrates to kind of get it in. But here's part of the argument. Where does that climb happen in the course? Like, is it towards the end? Then it may not even matter, right? But if it's early on or even middle, then we might be thinking we still have another 12, 36, 48, 72 hours after that we need to really worry about. So back in the days, I would say, absolutely that matters. And here's why I put in, where is it in the race? Because part of this research study also is they looked at their rate, the respiratory exchange ratio. So when they were exercising these time trials, they had a mask on, they were exercising, they got to analyze their carbohydrate and fat oxidation. And they noticed that towards the end of the exercise, their respiratory exchange ratio, which by the way, should increase if you feed carbohydrates. So if you eat carbs, you burn more carbs, right? And that's what you would see. They didn't see that, which kind of is a head scratcher. So again, it kind of comes down to, where are those efforts based on the course? So if it's towards the end, I actually don't think it would matter. If it's in the beginning or middle, I actually do feel like you better feed, or else the end of the race is going to be horrible for you.
Thank you for that answer. Let's define, you've written about metabolic efficiency training. Now, I could take a stab at defining training. Yeah. And I could even define metabolic, but talk to us about efficiency. What do you mean efficiency?
Yeah. It's a good question, because I hear this thrown around all the time. So I think a lot of your listeners, including your guys, have heard of metabolic flexibility, right? So that is basically the body's opportunity to go back and forth in using carbs and fat, right? Great.
Right.
The efficiency. So if you think about like running efficiency, what are we trying to do when we're trying to be more efficient? We're trying to teach our body to be more efficient, whether it's our stride rate or ground contact time, whatever it is. So metabolically or nutritionally, what we're trying to do is, the flexibility is what your body has built in. It can toggle between carbs and fats. The efficiency is to train it to do it better, right? So that's where nutrition comes into play, because as we were saying throughout this whole session, is that you can eat a lower carbohydrate plan or a higher carbohydrate or moderate and be more or less efficient in using fat and carbohydrate. That's the beauty about the human body. I mean, I've proven this in real life that you give me 7 days and I can make you either more fat adapted or carbohydrate adapted by merely changing your daily nutrition plan. So that's the efficiency part of it.
So thank you for that. Let's talk about carbohydrates, because we're kind of putting them into one category. But you can have an apple and have a simple carbohydrate, or maybe a candy cane at Christmas, and there's a piece of bread. So we have different carbohydrates.
Yeah, and are you talking more daily nutrition or during?
Race nutrition, take it where you want, but I know there's got to be a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is it gets a little bit in the weeds, because I also look at health and longevity and not just athletic performance. But we know, yes, carbohydrates kind of respond differently in the body. One is based on their glycemic index. Two is based on the amount of fiber they have. So we know that carbohydrates that are higher glycemic index, think like white rice, white pasta, and they don't have a lot of fiber, they will metabolize much faster, which will cause more of a blood sugar spike, more of an insulin spike, which favors carbohydrate burning and fat storage. Contrast that to maybe a brown rice or whole grain pasta, which is lower glycemic index, but also a lot more fiber. That will control blood sugar, will control insulin, which biochemically will also encourage the body to burn more fat. And let's remember, if we're burning one macronutrient, we're going to store the other more efficiently, right? Burn more carbs, store more fat. Burn more fat, store more carbs.
As long as we're on that, we know that you've been working for years with one of our longtime sponsors, UCAN.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that carbohydrate and how that works in the body, and how does that play in this metabolic efficiency?
Yeah, this is a super cool story, because especially where we are right now in nutrition, because technology is just engulfing sport nutrition right now. We see this with a lot of different brands right now. UCAN was actually, I forgot the exact year, but it was in the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s, somewhere in there, 2006-ish, 8-ish, where they actually approached me and kind of knocked on my door. I call it stalking, but they knocked on my door and they're like, "Hey, we've got this product, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, another company, whatever." And he started that one of the co-founders started talking to me about it. I'm like, wait. You're really making some big boy claims here. Like, this is not traditional. This is not along the lines of what we know. I'm like, I can kind of see where you're going with this. And I told him, I said, if this is true, I kind of feel like this is going to revolutionize part of the sport nutrition industry. But I'm not going to talk to you until you can show me a research paper that is not done by you, right? So, because that's the thing. There's a lot of bias out there. We know that, right? So it was, I hung up the phone kind of a thing, and I'm like, I'll never hear from him again, right? A couple of years later, he's like, "Hey, just want to pass along the research study. We did not fund it, nothing. And here are the results. Let's talk." Anyway, that got my attention, because literally, like, UCAN was kind of before all these times, before all the tech, all they're doing is cooking a non-GMO cornstarch differently, like in water, like heat and water and stuff. And they're just manipulating the actual molecule. So what it does is it takes a normal carbohydrate, non-GMO corn, and makes it elongated, if you will. So it's actually slower burning. So if you think of like these fast burning carbs, which are simple sugar based products, versus slower burning, and now there are a couple of them on the market, not with the UCAN technology though, but UCAN, even though it is a carbohydrate, and this is not a lot of runners get this or athletes get this, they just look at the label and they're like, "Oh, it's carbs." It's it acts very differently in the body. It does not cause a blood sugar spike. It steadies your energy. And in fact, you need to eat less of it during, because it's so stabilized, or so blood sugar stabilizing, which kind of comes back to this whole research study. Are we feeding carbohydrates at lower amounts just to stabilize blood sugar? Possibly, right? So that's where UCAN comes into play, is it's actually a very different acting carbohydrate that stabilizes blood sugar, which I think they're kind of on to something with this research study. I think these two should kind of get together and talk a little bit.
All right. Um, tell me this, Bob. After reading this study in January that came out in January, maybe you read it in February, have you changed the way that you're coaching your athletes?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say not 100%, because a lot of my philosophy is always about periodizing their nutrition, and always about improving the body's ability to burn fat through metabolic efficiency training and using that concept. What I am doing, though, is really supporting the whole lower carbohydrate feeding during exercise. It's not for everybody. I'll go on record saying that carbohydrates are not the bad guy. Some athletes need copious amounts of carbohydrate, mostly because their normal daily nutrition necessitate that. It sets them up for that. So I don't want to disclude the outliers, but I'm going to say the majority of us look at a bell-shaped curve. This is what's changed for me is maybe I was right. Maybe I've been right this whole time, right? But here's the thing. I don't want to push this on my athletes if they're not ready from a dietary standpoint. Meaning, Scott, if I ask you to follow a lower carb, not 50 grams or less, but maybe just lower, maybe you usually eat 200 grams a day. Maybe I'm going to ask you to do 100. So it's still doable. If you're not ready to do that, I'm not going to ask you to change, right? Even though I know it will help, I'm not going to ask you to do that until you're ready. So it kind of has changed my approach, but not for the most part.
You mentioned earlier that it's an N of 1. Can you tell, without doing any metabolic studies on an individual, can you look at their body type, body shape, and just say, boy, you would work much, much better on a low carb training plan versus, Jim Walmsley that's a stick.
Yeah.
He maybe needs higher carbohydrates.
Yeah.
Can you just eyeball somebody and say, you're better low carb, you're better high carb?
I wish I could, but if anybody ever says they can accurately, there is no possible biological way to do that. You can get close by doing some genetic testing, because there are actually certain genes that can favor fat or carbohydrate and kind of how it works in the body and the pathways, but it is impossible from a visual standpoint. Although I can ask a few more questions like, do you get GI distress? I can also ask about their daily nutrition and get a very close approximate of how well they will be burning fat or not be burning fat. In fact, I've kind of changed the way I talk about metabolic efficiency now, and I'm starting to use the term metabolic inefficiency more, because I'm seeing more runners and more athletes who are metabolically inefficient. So I'm like, why don't I just go with that instead of efficiency? Because we're trying to make everyone efficient, but so many people are inefficient, irregardless of body type. So there's a lot more things going on the inside.
So when we're training to get ready for a race, we may say, well, today's a long day. We're going to do a long run. We're going to do hills today. Today's speed work day. We have a little bit of variety, one to keep us fresh and to build different pathways and speed and strength and all of those types of things. And agility is going down the hill. Should we do the same with our nutrition as well?
You mean a daily change in nutrition?
I don't know.
Depending on what the workout is?
I don't think we should stick with the exact same diet. And I know there's going to be days that we burn more calories, so we eat more. I get that. But just, asking Bob, should we, think about variety in the type of calories we're consuming?
100%. And please just let's set that message one more time, not only for a variety standpoint and different nutrients in your gut and digestive health and all that stuff, but think about it this way. This is the way I think about it. Identify, like when I'm working with athletes, I always identify their quality sessions per week, right? So maybe they have a long run on Saturday. They've got maybe a track workout on Thursday and some hill workouts on Tuesday. So Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Identify the quality first, right? Because the day before that should be the more important eating day. Because remember what I said earlier, it comes back to, if we're going to talk about the muscle glycogen, you don't have, okay, let's go back. You don't have to pasta feed the day before these quality workouts, but you need to be more aware of the food you put in your body the day before the workout, because it takes about 12 to 24 hours to fill up the muscle glycogen gas tank, right? So, and I'll actually take long run out of it, because most of us don't do long runs at intensities, right? So let's just take like the speed work, hill repeats, sprints, track workout. So yeah, to me, it would make sense to favor, if you are not on a low carb diet, like these guys did in the research study, I would actually increase your carbs slightly. And by slightly, literally all I mean is an extra 3 to 5 servings of a carbohydrate rich food per day. So that could be between probably 30 to 50 grams total per day. So you don't have to go crazy, but you just have to maybe eat a little bit more if, here's the limiter, if you are not on a low carb diet. If you're on a low carb diet, don't do that, because you're trying to have these, trying to train your body to have these metabolic adaptations. So please don't disrupt that. But if you're following just like the normal, carbohydrate diet that most people do, then yeah, you should fluctuate your carbs up and down to support those metabolic demands.
Boy, a lot to think about. Not only the nutrition, but the sleep that goes along with it.
Yes.
All the pieces need to fall into place. And so when we're out there saying, "Yeah, how was your run today?" You go, "I had the best day." You've got to think, what did I eat? How long did I sleep? What are all the pieces that made it great?
Yep. Well, and that's a good point, Don, to bring that up, because a lot of us train in the mornings, right? And I feel like when I talk to the athletes I work with, I'm like, "Hey, how was your run?" They're like, "Oh, it's fantastic," and they started at 6, they finish at 8 or whatever. And you're like, okay, so it wasn't really about what you did that morning. It's about what you did the day before. Or perhaps, again, just tying in this new research, because I cannot forget about this, if they actually fed just a small amount of carbohydrate during that 2-hour run, maybe it was just as simple as maintaining blood sugar. Maybe we've been missing a lot of things. Maybe these Scandinavian researchers in the 1930s were actually onto something, but we kind of put those research studies, we kind of put them on the shelf, put them in the file cabinet, and forgot about them.
Do you think that we've let some of the marketing companies define some of our habits, nutrition habits?
Do you think?
Can we change the word think to no? 100%. I mean, there is not even a doubt in my mind about that.
Hey, I'm curious, Bob, when an athlete comes to you, and let's say I'm the athlete, okay? So I'll put myself out there. I don't think too much about my nutrition.
Yep.
I really don't. I think about what sounds good for dinner, right? And I may be trying to lower the number of carbohydrates, generally. But you mentioned something just now that got me thinking. When I go out for a 2-hour run, I rarely take any nutrition or even water with me. I mean, I think I know my body well enough, and I have enough experience that, Don and I go out for a 2-hour run and we don't take anything with us.
Yeah.
And when we get back, we have some, a big glass of water or whatever. And you mentioned that maybe there's some benefit in taking a little bit of carb during that 2-hour run. But so that's one question. Sorry, Don, this is a multiple part question. So that's one part of my question. The other part is when an athlete comes to you, let's say I come to you, how often are those athletes really thinking about nutrition or really doing a nutrition plan? We're all very concerned about how many miles we put in every week and whether we're doing the speed workout or the hill workout or the low heart rate, workout, but we're never really putting too much thought into nutrition.
Yeah.
At least I'm not.
Yeah.
What's your experience?
Let me classify that. I'm gonna do the second one first and the first one second. let me classify that, because in my experience in real life, working with athletes, there's a criteria that I've seen and a classification. So in this order is the order of paying more attention to nutrition. Triathletes, cyclists, runners.
Oh, interesting.
And I'm not going to say I don't know why that is, because I do know why, because I've worked with thousands of athletes, but it always seems to kind of fall into that classification. Now, of course, there are outliers there. I know a lot of runners
so tighter the spandex, the more they attribute to nutrition.
I think we're onto something there.
There's a paper there.
At least a survey or something, right? No, but it's funny because it is like, and if you think about it, it makes sense, right? For the most part. But it doesn't make sense for the most part. So, to your first question, I always think of what is next, right? So if the question is, do I need to feed even just a small amount, 10 grams of carbs like this paper did during a 2-hour run, 3-hour run? I always say, well, listen, if it's under 3 hours, you can probably get by with nothing, right? As you mentioned. But what do you have next? Like, is there something within the next 24 hours that may be affected negatively if you don't feed? So if you're like, hey, long run Saturday, rest day Sunday, do whatever you want. Like, honestly, there's like, but like I've been actually putting my toe in different water and training methods for me for my race coming up, where instead of like one long run per week, which trashes me right now, by the way, I don't know about you guys, but listen, as like we get older, like it's no joke, right? The whole recovery is no joke. So I've been doing 2 to 3 day stacks. I call them stacks of training, where I'll do kind of short to mid distance mileage. So in that case, if I do a Friday, Saturday, Sunday stack, I know that even on a 13, 15 miler on Friday, I actually do need to eat something, maybe not a lot, but I need to eat something because I know Saturday is coming. Then I know Sunday is coming. And then finally Monday is my rest day. So you see what I'm saying there? We have to kind of see what's coming next.
Oh, that's a good answer.
Yeah.
That's a good answer. Yeah. This article that you mentioned, the study that you've mentioned, we will have in the show notes. So if you want to read it, you can click on the show notes.
It's long, and it's long. But
do we need to ingest the 10 grams of carbohydrates mid article?
You actually might, because there's a lot in this article. I think I misspoke, and let me correct myself, because I can't remember if I did or not, but you'll catch it. I think I said they're on a treadmill. They're actually on bike. So sorry about that, but it was still the same time trial, but just different mode. They were not running. They were actually cycling. So if I let that slip, I totally apologize. I was in runner mode there.
So if you're trying to improve your ability to, be a long distance runner, is it possible to start to carry more muscle glycogen to improve the capacity of your muscle? Is there a strategy there, or is there some adaptation?
Yeah. So there's a ceiling of how much you can store, number one, right? So we know like larger males can store more than smaller petite females, right? Just because of muscle mass. So taking that out of the equation, yeah, your daily nutrition will facilitate how much you're going to store within that ceiling, right? So if you do eat more carbohydrate, you will store more. But let's just not forget, because we're talking about runners, let's not forget when you eat more carbs, you actually store more body water, which could be a positive thing, but for some athletes could also be a negative thing, because now you're affecting body mass, which may reduce efficiency or running economy, depending on the course. Like, you see what I'm saying? Like if you're 5 to 8 pounds heavier, even though it's water weight, you could actually have slower times if that is important. Or maybe not even making cutoffs or check-ins.
Yeah, you may be at a pace where that really doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not running with Usain Bolt.
Right, right. Yeah.
So I would what I was thinking is, 5 years ago when I started running, and now I've glycogen adapt, or I have more ability to store. Now I can store not only X but 2X. Now, that's an exaggeration, but an increase.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you can do that for sure. And that's like the exciting research on the other side of this, is actually adapting your gut. It's called gut training, to be able to metabolize, or to be able to eat or consume more carbohydrates. So there's actually a strategy for that if you want to try to go on the other side of what we're talking about and overconsume carbohydrates during training. So there's not a right or wrong. We have to kind of come back to the, it depends on what you're trying to do.
in that, and then experiment of one. You've got to try it and see how it works for you. There are some people out there that are high in slow twitch muscle fiber, some in high twitch, right? Fast twitch, slow twitch.
Yep.
And so either a power lifter or an endurance person, it depends how you're set up. When you came out of the chute, what kind of cards did you have?
Exactly.
And you look at the cards and you go, yeah, I'm a heavy lifter. I can't lift anything, but I can go for a long time. So our guts are kind of the same way.
Yeah, it's amazing because you guys know I just updated my metabolic efficiency training book, 3rd edition, and I actually included a section on gut training because it is so popular these days, right? But it's also unknown. Like athletes are like, hey, all these companies are making like super high carb drinks or gels or whatever. Should I do it? I'm like, well, if you do it, you better do it right. So we know we actually, talking about the other side of the continuum, we need at least about, I would say if you want to do it right, 8 to 12 weeks to train our gut to take in more carbohydrates per hour during training or racing safely, right? So you don't want to just be like, hey, it's Friday. Tomorrow I've got a 50K. I'm going to just consume 100 grams of carbs tomorrow. Never done it before, but I'm going to consume 100 grams of carbs per hour and see what happens. Like, no. The body can be adapted, but it needs time. So I kind of lay out a plan and how you can do that. Even because here's the thing. Let me just back up really quick. A lot of people have seen me as, oh, that's that metabolic efficiency training guy. He's all about fat adaptation. Listen, I'm all about making your body more efficient however you want to. If you want to be more efficient in consuming and using carbohydrates, we can do that. If you want to be more efficient at using more fat so you preserve carbohydrates, we could do that too, right? It all starts with nutrition. So I'm never like taking sides. I kind of gravitate to one side, especially with people older than 40, because longevity starts to become more of a concern and health. And I think you guys understand what side I would go on with that. But fat adaptation. But just because of like I pull in longevity now. But I kind of feel like the body is such a great biological organism that can be trained as long as you are relatively healthy in a non-disease state.
So, Bob, I've never been one to journal.
Yeah.
And keep track of my, my time or my distance or how long I have had a pair of shoes or anything. And I probably should have. And I wish I would have. Looking back, I think that would have been a smart thing. But now I can see, boy, I should have a page on nutrition. One page, columns, however you want. Our triathlete people would have a spreadsheet. They probably have one, but we don't. We write on the back of a napkin somewhere. So, I could see I should have watched my meals, how I performed, how I felt, and just really, really had a strategy around this instead of just throwing, caution to the wind and going out and doing it.
I mean, you can do it haphazard. Like I tell people, you just learn a lot more life lessons that way, and it takes a lot longer, right? So
I'll tell you the life lesson that I learned was a very spicy, large burrito the night before was not the play. And I did not have to journal that. That was embedded in my brain. I didn't do it twice.
I bet it
was journaled with a little more spackle on the leaves of a tree.
I was just going to make reference to that also, Scott.
Great minds, Bob.
That's right.
Great minds.
That's right. I had the same instance. Like my first Ironman. Listen, I was tossing them in a bush because I ate a chocolate chip cookie at whatever mile 15 on the marathon. Because I'm like, oh, it's a chocolate chip cookie. What could go wrong?
Yeah.
Oh, hello.
You can journal that.
It went wrong.
It went wrong. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your company. How did your nutrition company align with this new paper that came out? Were you pleasantly surprised?
Oh, I was elated. Like all of this kind of like stars aligned because the paper came out. I read it. I got super excited. You guys emailed me. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. and it does. And listen, research never proves anything exponentially, right? We know that. It's always a building block to the next research study. What this has done for me, though, is allows to have a conversation with athletes and say, listen, there are options that we have. Not only is it Bob, trying to tell you this is the way it is because he's been doing this for 20 years and whatever, but now it's like, you know what? Other people are doing this too. And that's like, honestly, that's like the metabolic efficiency training. When I was like, for 15 years, there was no research on it. And everyone's like, hey, when are you going to do research? I'm like, hey, I'm not a PhD. I'm not going to do that. And then finally research came out. And I'm like, Thank the good heavens, right? It just supports the conversations. And that's the great thing, because then I can help athletes make decisions based on their health, their longevity, and their performance related goals.
Great.
So Don, what was your question you asked at the beginning of the podcast, and did you answer it for yourself?
Well, yeah, I think the answer is try nothing new on race day.
Well,
Don't.
what's the question?
The question is, should we pre-race
Yeah.
pasta stuff ourselves to the very top with pasta and cookies the night before the race? I mean, it sounded like just from the jump, it sounds like a risky move. But now I think that, in fact, that would not be the right thing to do for many reasons that we discussed.
I would support that.
I think the golden nugget that I came away with is I need to pay more attention to what I eat on a normal day, and I need to pay attention what I'm eating or consuming on training day. And I remember back when I first started running, I read on the back of a little satchel of energy gel, it said, take one of these gels 1 hour prior to running and one every 45 minutes. And I thought, well, they know what they're doing. They're not trying to sell me more gels, right?
That was marketing.
And so I was going down to the local running store and buying boxes of gels, because on a 1 hour run, I would consume minimum of 2. Anyway, so what I'm thinking is on our Saturday run, Don, I may bring 10 grams of carbohydrate, and halfway through that run, I may take a little shot and see what happens, and see if that helps not only that day, or maybe the subsequent day when I go out and run. So I think this is a great conversation, and you've enlightened us all. I think that if you're listening to this podcast and you haven't read Bob's Metabolic Efficiency book, now in the 3rd edition, you should go get it. It's on Amazon. It's probably also at Bob's website, which is energyperformance.com. Energy is spelled ENRG. So not the way you normally spell it, ENRGperformance.com. Lots more information there. He also, tell us a little bit about this. We've had Dina Griffin on our podcast before also. Dina Griffin is your co-host on your podcast called Inside Sports Nutrition. What do you talk about on that podcast?
Well, thank you for allowing me to mention that and talk about it. Because, we've come together. This is I think we're going on 3 or 4 years. I can't remember now. We're at like 175 episodes, but it is literally anything sport nutrition related. So we're talking about things from analyzing sport nutrition products like drinks and bars and gels, to looking at caffeine and HMB and creatine. We've got experts on, we've got protein researchers. We interviewed Alan Lim, the founder of Scratch Labs. So just some really cool guests, but we're just trying to bring kind of what I did here, all the kind of confusing things with research. We're trying to bring it into real life sport nutrition that can affect and improve our health, longevity, and performance. But we're trying to kind of put a little spin on it. Like, it's just like an armchair talk, kind of like you guys do, but it's all sport nutrition related, male, female, young, not so young, any type of athlete, from team sport to ultra to you name it. It's pretty cool. We have a fun time doing it.
That's great.
Yeah.
I need to tune in and listen more frequently than I have in the past. So that's the 2 things I come away with: work better on my nutrition and listen to Bob's podcast, Inside Sports Nutrition, more frequently.
And I've noticed, Scott, the efficiency of the way he spells energy. I mean, he doesn't waste letters. They're all there.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the first person that's ever
It's a
brought
microcosm.
that up. It is. Yeah. I appreciate that, Don.
You bet.
Only in Don's mind does a crazy observation like that happen. He's brilliant when it comes to that. Hey, so whatever you're doing, make sure your nutrition is right. Make sure your shoes are tied in a double knot, and go out and run
Mas.